We're not just going to let $400 million of corruption be swept under the rug so Justin Trudeau can get on with his day. So we say, let's end this now. Let's get Parliament back to work by handing over the documents to the police.
There is only one political party that is holding things up in the House of Commons right now, and that is the Conservative Party of Canada, because they are afraid that if this study goes to committee, what they will hear from experts is that this is an egregious abuse of power.
A dispute over disclosing documents to Parliament has bogged down business in the House, but frustration with their political situation and a lack of clear action from their leadership has quickened the pulse of the Liberal caucus, as Liberal MPs have been voicing their frustration in their private caucus meetings and to reporters, all while the Prime Minister is out of the country. Those issues, plus the PBO's new math and progress on pharmacare, give our party insiders a lot to talk about this week. Melanie Richer is a former communications director for the NDP. Fred Delory is a former Conservative campaign manager. And Greg McEachern is a former Liberal ministerial staffer. Happy Friday, everyone. I don't know if it's a happy Friday for Liberals, Greg. I just want to start with what's been going on this week. Tense meetings in caucus, a lot of talking to reporters, of frustration, no national campaign director, and an election coming at any time. How would you describe the state of things inside your party right now?
I've also heard, I've had some calls from MPs and staff. It was not a very good week. I think internally, the fact that it stayed, kind of the lid stayed on this long, I think this week was a bit of a surprise to me. I thought they might be able to skate to the weekend with without the what's coming out. What I'm hearing is that the caucus meeting on Wednesday morning was pretty rough.
It was, yeah.
That people are pretty angry. Simultaneously, just so that people are aware, the Prime Minister is away. He's on a big trip. And so a lot of the PM, along with the PM, a lot of PMO staffers. I remember with Stephen Harper when trouble used to happen when Prime Minister Harper left town, and the Liberals didn't used to have that problem. This week they do. I kind of alluded to this last week. I think for some people, and I know the Ad Issue panel a week ago spent a lot of time on the podcast that the Prime Minister did with Nate Erskine-Smith, which was really enlightening and perhaps not in the way that the Prime Minister's office thought it was going to go. It cuts down to this, David. I think the people that want to support the Prime Minister are getting really tired of waiting for a sign, a message, Fred, a narrative about what's going to come next.
Right.
And on top of that, I'm told that some of the criticisms that were being floated around were the treatment by ministerial staff, MPs themselves, by people who work for the Prime Minister's office. So at a time when you need all hands on deck and you're ticking people off, it's not a good thing. So there's a lot of rumors going around about how unhappy people are and what this is going to amount to. We've heard some of this before, but this week seemed a little different.
Yeah, and Fred, I would agree with that. I don't know how plugged in you are with the Liberal caucus, but the anxiety level and the frustration level, and I would say maybe the determination level to maybe push for some change from the Liberals I spoke with is higher than it was after St. Paul's, and that was pretty high. LaSalle and Verdun woke up Quebec, and there's a bunch of other things happening right now.
I don't understand how this hasn't boiled over yet. After St. Paul's, right there, being 20 points down for the last year, right there, like there's all these instances, and Liberals just seem to also put their head in the sand and think Trudeau's going to come up with something to save us at the last minute. I don't know if that's their approach. If you look at the 2015, 2019, 2021 campaigns, it was the last 2 weeks that the Liberals were able to turn the tide and win that. And I don't know if they're just, if all these MPs and caucus members just think that this is what's going to happen again next time and hope that that's going to be the case. And maybe Trudeau and his close people think the same. But I do not understand how he survived St. Paul's and then LaSalle and then everything that's been going on where the House has been bogged down. They're not getting anything done. Nothing's happening.
Okay, or 1 sec, I just got to get something here. What I'm hearing is, Mel, is that there was some hopes maybe that this might take care of itself, and it hasn't. And look, I'm not trying to be dramatic here. Something is changing this week. I don't know if it's going to go in a real severe direction or not, but I'm picking it up, and a lot of other people are picking it up, and Greg is certainly picking it up. Where do you think things are based on some of the reporting we've seen and what we've been hearing?
Right. Well, to everyone's point, like, it's not good to be able to calm the waters for so long when things are so dire. Seems crazy that this has happened for this long. I think what's even maybe more dangerous for the Liberals right now is now that all this noise continues to play when they don't actually have anything to say. I think we have all been in situations where we had a bit of a caucus revolt, and those things are not fun. And when, all people are paying attention to is your MPs saying, oh, we disagree with this, we disagree with that, anonymous MP here, anonymous MP there, you're still really trying hard to push your message to drown out a little bit of that, to show that you've got your house in order. But when you're not pushing out a message and all folks are really hearing is that you don't have a plan, you don't have a director, an election could be next week, in 2 weeks, like it could come at any time now. I don't know if you can't convince those Liberal MPs to stay the course, because there is no course, I don't know what you expect Canadians at home to feel, to believe, to hope in. I just don't see what they're telling people. So,
Greg, just a last question on this before we switch to what Fred wants to talk about, but this is a break week.
Yeah.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing for the PMO right now? Because, yeah, the MPs are dispersed, so they're not together, but the MPs are dispersed, so you can't reach them, and they're going to be talking to their constituents.
Absolutely. I would just say previously, we heard this last year ahead of the caucus in London, the Liberal caucus retreat at the end of the summer, and this year there was a lot of hints that something was going to come. And then I think, when everybody's in the room, it's a bit tougher to say things to people's faces. Perhaps that was kind of the catalyst this week. Perhaps that there are other, I think there's some things because of the supply and confidence deal ending, that this is a very different parliament, and some people might have to readjust. Travel, I think, has been really curtailed for a lot of ministers, and how that works. There's probably some irritants around that. But it also means that the Prime Minister would not be able to address all these people like he would in a normal week next Wednesday. They're all going to be, as you say, David, dispersed. But there's lots of online tools for virtual meetings to happen, and those MPs may be having those.
Okay, I just want to talk about some new reporting that's just dropped from our colleague, or my colleague, Althea Raj at the Toronto Star. And she has a piece that's just gone online, not your usual rabble-rousers, inside the growing calls among MPs for Justin Trudeau to step down. So what you have here, she talks about Cody Blois, who is the chair of the Atlantic Caucus, who stood up, she reports, in caucus this week. I've heard similar things, saying to the National Caucus that Atlantic Caucus had a difficult, frank, and open conversation about the future of the party, and then he left. So that's sending a pretty clear signal that something is happening in the part of the country, Greg and Fred, that you and I are from, which probably means why we're all aware of some of this discontent. But what is afoot, she says, and this is similar to things that I've heard, is that there are several discussions within caucus about pressuring Trudeau to step down. And she puts the numbers of MPs as maybe, 30?
Wow.
What does that mean, Fred?
So in 2015, when Trudeau swept Atlantic Canada, all 32 seats, I was one of those candidates from the Conservative Party that was defeated. And I can tell you there was a feeling on the ground then that I had never felt or seen in all my time in politics. It was a time for change and a time for the Liberals. I am feeling it again now. The tide's going the other way. The tide's finally going out and coming back blue. And we're seeing that across the region. So guys like Cody Blois and these guys, they're going to lose their seats right now if things do not change in a very drastic way. So they're not just fighting for the future of the Liberal Party, they're fighting for their jobs and what they're going to be able to do after this, because a lot of them are going to get wiped out.
They've talked, Althea says, about storming the microphone at caucus to urge Trudeau to resign. Calls were being made this week asking MPs to sign a letter. There are at least 30 to 40 MPs ready to sign it, according to several caucus sources. I have heard a lower number, but it was moving in this direction, and my information may be a little bit out of date. Mel, look, the Toronto Star, Althea Raj, well plugged in with the Liberal government. What do you make of that number? 30 to 40, if it's that high. it's over.
That's a lot of seats. That's more than what is needed to, vote non-confidence in this government to begin with. But for the Prime Minister, that's a big number. And you mentioned this earlier, how the Prime Minister's traveling and his people kind of travel with him. I've never had the pleasure of working in government, so I know that this is a thing that happens, but I couldn't imagine, I was one of those people that was often calming the storms at caucus. I could not imagine traveling with the leader all the time and have the chief of staff with the leader all the time, because there's no soldier on the ground, calming those nerves, making sure you're getting ahead of problems before they blow up to 30, 40. The fact that he's traveling right now and his team's traveling with him, and this is the conversation that's playing out. And to your point, in the question heading to the ridings, that's not good timing, because that just means that that feeling, that anger, that wanting to change things, that's just going to sit there and grow and not, be calmed or be addressed. So it doesn't sound like that's good news for the Prime Minister.
We're we're doing an audible here a little bit from our plan for this segment, and I apologize for that, because look, there was a little bit of back and forth about this, hearing this today, and we're trying to get it to a reportable point. But I got calls from pretty senior people in this government today asking what I'd heard, Greg, and it's all been a little bit unclear to me, though it aligns with what Althea has there. If 30 to 40 members of the Liberal caucus do sign a letter saying the Prime Minister has to go, as the Star says they're are likely prepared to do, I had heard that already 24 had agreed to do it, 20 to 24, and that the number was growing. How do they deal with that?
So you and I have chatted the last couple of days about this. We've heard similar things. I've heard, when you gave the number range, I heard of the higher range. This is so preventable. Fred and I did a podcast on Fred's podcast after Prime Minister Mulroney passed away, and I talked about a book that Mulroney hated, the Mulroney tapes. But when you read that book, you see a caucus that was loyal to him to the very end because of two words: caucus management. And this has been, something that has been coming in a slow-moving train for quite a while. And the fact that it's gotten to this point is because of things like when you interviewed the Prime Minister in June, David, and you asked him why he wanted another term, and it really wasn't an adequate answer. People will go to the wall for the people they support in our world, right? Like, loyalty is a big thing, but you got to give them a reason, and they have to know that you're in it. And if they don't think that, they're obviously going to start to think about self-preservation. It's just human nature. I mean, I've had people wondering, is the Colbert visit, is the Nate Erskine-Smith podcast, is this Laos trip, are these like the final grand tour, or is this somebody that is running again and wants to stay? The fact that those questions are being openly asked by people in the Liberal caucus, I think, are telling and troubling, David.
So Fred, some texts with someone right now that I know is aware, at least, of this effort that is going on. And what a lot of them are pointing to as motivation is when you look at the polling and what a change of leadership means, in particular for people, it just raises the ceiling way up. And the recognition amongst some of the very discontented Liberals is the next election, pretty long odds of winning it. The play needs to be a furniture saver that holds Pierre Poilievre to a minority. And they don't believe even that can happen without a change in leadership. And that is what is motivating these conversations and motivating these efforts. What do you think of it?
Oh, I think it shouldn't just, to the point about holding him to a majority or minority, I think that may be too far gone. It's about, will the Liberal Party survive this election? Will they be the official opposition or third or fourth place party? That's a potential thing that's on the table here. But to the point earlier about how many members may be signing this letter or whatever this is or talking about it, this is going to now gain steam now that we're getting it. It's now coming out in the news. How many people are talking about this? I have some experience with letters and removing caucus leaders, Conservative party leaders. And I can tell you, once it gets going, it gets a lot easier to sign your name to that. Also, it's a huge blow to Trudeau that we're even talking about this, that people are talking about this publicly now. So if you're an MP for the Liberal Party, you're probably at the point now you have to sign that letter to remove him, because if you don't, you're really just going to send your ship down.
Well, Fred, your experience was different with Aaron O'Toole because your caucus adopted the powers of the Michael Chong Reform Act. So caucus can force a change. Greg, one of the challenges the Liberals face here, who are unhappy, and look, you have the same conversations I have in many cases, like, well, I don't know who you speak with, but same types of conversations. They don't have that option because the Liberals didn't adopt it and they don't believe in it. So these sorts of backroom efforts and these sorts of pushes to try to do things is the only option they have. And there was a push for even a caucus meeting after Toronto St. Paul's. That didn't happen. Individual groups, smaller meetings, a diffusion of the anger and the anxiety into smaller groups to be managed, got to the Nanaimo caucus where MPs I spoke to who were at that said, we're being managed, we're not getting the time we need to talk about these things. The schedule was very structured to keep it away from the discontent with where things are, but also hanging over that was the great question of what's going to happen in La Salle-Verdun. They got their answer, and that has become the latest inflection point. That, and that Jeremy Broadhurst, the National Campaign Director, said in August he was leaving. Right. We're going into the Thanksgiving weekend, and there is no replacement as a National Campaign Director. What do you think?
Yeah, these are all, this is internal bleeding, but it's still death by 1,000 cuts. I mean, I know that some of the people that, want a catalyst here, what is going to happen here? They were concerned about what we're doing right now, that this is out before it's had a chance to be presented to the Prime Minister, and he can, reflect, make his decisions. But now it's public, and so now it can be weaponized by your opponents, which is what a lot of people wanted to avoid. But when it's at this point, again, people needed a sign. They needed something after St. Paul's. And, in that interview with Nate Erskine-Smith, the Prime Minister refers to the candidates not having enough time on the ground. Well, wait a second, who called the by-elections? Totally. Right? Who chooses the candidates? And so I'm not, it may have come out about the executive director of the Liberal Party, or sorry, the campaign director for the Liberal Party, when it did, but I think they knew ahead of that there were issues. That just doesn't turn on a dime, that there are concerns. So this has been going on. I think there were concerns around this in terms of St. Paul's. So no one should be surprised here. I think, as you said earlier, Fred, the surprise is how long it's taken. I think people have put a lot of water in their wine. They've been very loyal, and I think people are reaching the breaking point. I think what's also you're seeing happening is that people who would have a better chance of getting reelected and would run again are starting to question whether or not that's in their best interest. And that's, you're talking about save the furniture. Well, you have to have the furniture in the first place to save. You have to have those good quality candidates who've got, name recognition, incumbency, community relations. If those people are saying that I'm not seeing why I'm going to lean into this yet again, unless I'm given a good reason, and it's October, no wonder they're going to perhaps move on.
Mel, look, I don't know how far this will go. Right now, it's efforts to get people to sign a letter, according to what Althea has there, and we've been hearing a lot of the same stuff in our newsroom today. I know there was some concern with people who were trying to do this, that if word got out too early, it allows the counterattack to try to stop it, and maybe the splintering of the unity of, let's call them the mutineers. I don't know what else to call them at this point. I'm sure that will be described in the PMO. What do you anticipate, that happens now?
I mean, it's kind of out there, right? And the fact that, like, the number 30 to 40 that's not like, oh, that's just a handful of folks. That's more than the NDP's caucus. That's
sure
more
is,
than
I was going to say that, but I didn't want to be rude. But it's a big number of
That's
Parliament,
a big
right?
number, and in this Parliament, that's a massive difference maker. If those folks stop showing up, if those folks, if they were to use their power in the House on any of these bills, we're talking a whole different story here. But I want to go back to what you said about the podcast, and that to me was also telling, is more excuses instead of taking responsibility for anything. Why didn't we do the ads? Why the answers from the Prime Minister again were like, oh well, they didn't have enough time, or we didn't think it was the right moment. No taking responsibility, no doing anything. And I think this is continuously one of the things that continues to get them in trouble. And it's a bit of a dramatic comparison, but when you look to British Columbia and what Kevin Falcon has done with, I want to say the BC Liberals, the BC United, you're by what he's done, you're not just saving the furniture, you've given them no ability to get seats, to continue to build the party, to try to figure out, okay, where do we restart from here? So if I was, a Liberal MP, I'd be looking at that, and it's more than Justin Trudeau. It has to be more than Justin Trudeau. So at what point do you say, either we're restarting at zero, and that's not a place that I want to restart at, or we find a way to, save some of us so that we can keep the Liberal Party elected in the House of Commons? Those are legitimate questions and legitimate conversations to have, and that's likely what we're seeing play out.
Fred, help me with your resume for a sec. When the Conservatives were government, were you there during the minority parts of it?
The entire time.
The entire time, right. Okay. So when you're in a minority, and you guys were on the way up in the minority, you were building from the minority. This is the reverse of the Harper situation. You started small, ended, they started big, decline. You need to be on a crisis footing, right? Because things can happen at any time. And the thing I keep hearing is that where is that crisis urgency right now? To not have a national campaign director, to have so much senior staff in Laos. Like I understand going to the German part of the trip you're supposed to do with the Ramstein Defense Conference. Joe Biden's going to be there. When the G7 leaders are there and the president is there, you got to go, and you got to bring your senior people. I don't know about the other parts of it, right? There's people very concerned about what they're seeing as not being on the toes, ready to go.
Yeah, we were our most effective, the Conservative Party under Harper, during those minority years. We were constantly under threat. At any time our government could fall. We had no agreements with any other parties, so we had to go bill by bill, week by week. And that's how we survived from 2006 to 2011. And there was in fact, there was almost a coalition to take us down during that. So we had a war room, fully operational, a campaign office, being run and ready to go on an hour's notice.
And that was an actual coalition. It was an actual coalition they tried to form, right?
But for us, we were ready to go at any time, and our messaging was tight. It was when we formed the majority government that we lost our edge. We took our eye off the ball, and we were punished for it in 2015, where we just weren't at the same level that we were. And you're right, it's a great point where the Liberals in 2015, they got their majority, and they just were coasting since then. They have not had a real solid narrative since that 15 campaign. There's no real reason why they're giving Canadians to say, re-elect us.
And as tenuous as things were in your minority, you weren't facing a Pierre Poilievre polling north of 40% the way they are now. You had Dion and Ignatieff, and I'm not dismissing them, but we know...
We were not polling at 40%.
Yes, maybe added together. But I'm sorry, I want to keep going with this for another second, but we probably got a preview of this, Greg, on the OAS vote. 5 Atlantic MPs. Right? Which is probably where a lot of this discontent. The Cody Blois thing, our newsroom is confirming that he went in and said that.
And someone who was in the cabinet.
Pablo Rodriguez. But he's got a whole different agenda now, right? He wants to become the premier of Quebec, and this is a big issue in Quebec.
Yeah,
but the 5 Atlantic MPs, right? We talk about Fortress Toronto and the island of Montreal, Atlantic Canada, and the lower mainland of BC are the other legs on that table that has held the Liberals up.
One of those MPs represents the town that I grew up in. That had a Liberal sign on a corner lot for many, many years, and had many, many successful Liberal MPs. It's the riding part of it would be Alan J. McCacken's. So when I saw that they voted the way they did, to me, it's obvious. I was home a few times this summer. I was home last weekend, and again, I hear the same thing over and over again, where people say, Greg, kind of tired of your guy. Your guy's got to go. Nervous about the other guy, not sure I like him, but it's time. And I'm sure if you are in those ridings, every weekend, it starts to grate, because they're the people who put you in Ottawa are telling you, we're going to remove you from Ottawa, and we're telling you why, and you're not doing anything.
Right. So, look, I know we wanted to talk about the documents and the privilege motion in Parliament, PBO and his new math, and pharmacare. Do we want to talk about those, or keep talking about the implications of what appears to be happening with the Liberal government?
It seems like bigger news.
Okay, all right, I'm just saying, you know.
If it's real, if it's-
this is.
I can't win on
It's
this.
real.
So
Yeah. No, it's
hey, David,
Greg is
I
like,
think it's your
yeah.
show, so I'll...
No, look, this is the most collegial panel out there where people actually are from different parties. So, you know, I wanted to stick with that vibe in doing this. You know, consult with the caucus, see how they feel about things.
Look at familiar.
Consulting.
But so
management.
Mel, like, I don't know where in the world the Prime Minister is right now, if they're in Laos, on their way back, you know, flying back and these sorts of things. I'm not sure. I have not been on the new plane because it was the old plane before I became a house cat here on this show. I don't know what his communications ability to be informed are, but this is out there now. It's in the Star. We've heard it. Other newsrooms are on it. It seems like it's going to be a thing. What do you do when you land? How do you deal with this?
That's a great question. I had 9 MPs who I think I'd spoken to Hannah Thibodeau at the time saying that if Jagmeet didn't win his by-election, he'd just step down, and where do you start when you don't have the list? And you can't just start calling around. Obviously, you have an idea of who's upset, but when the list is that big, it's hard to... What do you even say when you don't know what you're saying? If you don't have a message externally, how can you have a message internally? If you have nothing to point to, if you can't point to, you know, fundraising being good, if you can't point to ads that are out of market, if you can't point to election readiness when, you know, election's on your doorstep, it's hard to calm people. It's hard to reassure people. And to your point, if you're hearing that on the doorstep, our MPs are hearing that on the doorstep, I think that's probably likely a contributing factor to why they walked away from the supply and confidence agreement.
I'm sure it is.
I can't imagine that folks aren't hearing that. And I always remember 2015, I was in St. John's for the provincial election following the federal election, and everybody I spoke to said to me, God, I love Jack Harris. I'm so upset he didn't win, but I just didn't like Tom Mulcair. And it's kind of the same thing, right? It doesn't matter how much people like you as their MP or how much you've done for them as their MP or whether they see that you're there and you're a good person. If they don't like the direction your party's going in, if they don't like your leader, it's not going to work out for them.
And Jack Harris, you know, the former NDP MP for St. John's East and my dad's lawyer back in the day, because it's a small town, they went to the same school together. He won his provincial seat when Brian Tobin was sweeping the province. He won it when Danny Williams was sweeping the province, but he lost when Trudeau was sweeping the Atlantic in 2015, right? Yep. That shows the change. Yep. So he's in the air now, is what I'm told, the Prime Minister is. He'll be landing after we're off the air when he gets home. And, you know, Greg, we know some of the names, right? Like that have wanted him to go for a long time. Wayne Long, Ken McDonald, 2 people from Atlantic Canada. You have people like Serge Cormier, you know, vote against the government on the OAS bill. Alexander Mendez said things going into caucus in Nanaimo. It's easy to dismiss it when you can say, oh, it's just the same small group of malcontents. My numbers of at least 2 dozen, Althea's numbers of 30 to 40, that's not just the small number of malcontents, right? That's getting into critical mass territory. So what, I mean, this is going to ruin their Thanksgiving weekend, I'm sure, but what does the Prime Minister and his staff do when he gets back to Canada?
I think you need to speak to caucus leadership as quickly as possible. I would, you know, my advice would be to take that core leadership group and kind of start there. So you have an idea of where do you need to, who do you need to address first? And I want to play defense here for a little bit, if I'm with permission.
Someone's got to. Go ahead.
No, but I'd like to pick it up a bit. So just so that you understand the mindset here, there are a lot of Liberals that recall the Chrétien Martin battle, and you know the implication that we always felt was that, you know, it damaged the party for a long time, in the long term, and people wanted to avoid that. So part of the reason why this has not come up in you know, in public and in, you know, you named a couple of people. I remember your interview with Alexandra Mendez. It was before caucus, and she was, you know, her narrative was, I'm reflecting what my constituents are telling me. So again, I'm sure she took a lot of heat for that. People are very grateful in the Liberal Party, you know, to Justin Trudeau. You know, we were 3rd place, you know, and part of the struggles I think the Liberal Party has right now is that they went from 3rd to 1st. You didn't have that farm team on the Hill that you would have had with a strong opposition, a lot of people in MPs' offices. So there's a lot of gratitude towards Justin Trudeau for what he's done. There's a lot of recognition of the accomplishments that he's done. So I want to really say that, and I'm not trying to do a eulogy here, I want to really emphasize that how tough this would have been these conversations were for a lot of people. And if they are saying it publicly and it's getting out, I got calls from ministers to staff to reporters starting on Wednesday around 6 o'clock. These messages have been delivered previously. Very different forms, perhaps a little nicer, but this should not be a surprise. So when you're asking me for my advice on what advice I would give, is my challenge is, what were you working on? Like if you read in the paper that people are upset that there's no campaign director for the Liberal Party, like Liberals are unhappy on that, and then none is, a week goes by, a month, more weeks, and nothing is done.
A quarter has gone by.
Those irritants are not going to go away. They're just going to fester, unfortunately.
Right. So, Fred, just we got to wrap it. Final thoughts from you. You said you were surprised it took this long, and what I'm hearing as to why picks up on some of the things Greg touched on. People really like the Prime Minister. They think he has a good record. They think he has a good legacy, and they broadly are thankful and supportive for what he's done. So it's not a conclusion they came to easily. And also, there is no obvious rival. There's no Paul Martin, right? So there's no camp organizing to do this. This is pretty fueled by backbenchers who are worried about their own jobs, worried about their own futures, and worried about what the heck happens to the Liberal Party. So I'm sure Stephen Harper would have handled it differently than Justin Trudeau will, but what do you think the Prime Minister and staff need to do?
Well, I think what they need to do is what I said they needed to do after St. Paul's. Right after that, we came on, we did a special show, and I think it was a Tuesday or Wednesday after, and we talked about it, and I said he should go to ground with his most senior people and come up with a message and a narrative and a plan forward. They did not do that. They have not done that. Here we are 6 months later, and now we're talking about it just festering. They haven't put themselves in any position to win this.
Yeah, anyway, we'll see what happens. Our newsroom's working on this. We're going to have more information on this, and we're going to be publishing stuff soon. So stay tuned for that, gang. And look, thanks for pivoting. This is what happens when information happens when you're live on the air, and you got to call the audible. I'm glad it's you three who were here with me to do this. I appreciate it. Fred Delory, Greg McEachern, and Melanie Richer.